Exactly. They might do something really bad to you.
I mean, if you read some of the stuff like from the Ugaritic texts or anything from the Mesopotamian mythologies, I mean, those gods were just horrific at times.
Yes, they are horrific. And one thing I find interesting is that today it's basically taken as axiomatic amongst a lot of people that morality and goodness flows from following God's laws and rules. But compare that to the Romans. The Romans knew that their gods were bastards.
But now you're getting into your point now. You're up to getting into some of the prophets, I believe, because we've just finished up the kingdoms in your podcast, if I remember correctly.
I've finished the United Kingdom, and I'm just starting the Two Kingdoms period.
Okay.
Does that disrupt you?
No, because I was having a little hard time remembering because I've listened to so many of your episodes, and I went and tried to go back on them. I couldn't remember if because you did your last episode, and then you did the episode with Steve about the apocryphal literature, and so I kind of got mixed up a little bit there. Now, what seems to be so interesting about I know that for me, there's some interesting things in some of the prophets, some of their stories, because they seem to be some kind of schizophrenic individuals there.
Yes, I haven't got to Ezekiel yet. In fact, Ezekiel won't appear until my second series. No, is that right? No, I'm getting confused. Yes, the prophets, some of them are just crazy. The two earliest prophets are Amos and Hosea. Amos is, I call him the perfect pocket prophet. He's short, he's to the point, and he's not mad. He's actually quite reasonable. The other one Hosea, who lived shortly after him, is the exact opposite. Hosea is barking nuts. And the whole book is just one sexually charged rant where he's talking about he's taken this, as usual, prostitute for a wife, and he's got two sons or two kids, and he's called one of them Not Wanted, and the other one is sort of, Hideous Horror. Great naming convention, guy.
It was. He was one of the interesting ones. And then there was another one that I think he sat in the middle of the street and just kept covering himself in manure or something like that as some kind of a protest thing. A lot of it sounds like something that you would see happening in the streets in like Seattle, Washington or something.
It's Seattle? But people cover themselves in poo in Seattle.
Well, more like Portland, I guess, because Portland is kind of where a lot of the hippie protester types like to retire to.
Oh yeah, I've seen the show.
Yeah. But some of those are kind of weird. And then also in that section is also some of the wisdom literature where we talk about like Proverbs, the Psalms, Song of Solomon, all of those interesting books.
Yeah, the Proverbs is quite interesting, actually. That's, I'm trying to remember now. That's in about 5 separate chunks. And until recently, we thought it was sort of, what do you call it? How do you pronounce it? Sui generis? Unique. I'll use the word unique. Mm-hmm. But then we discovered a whole bunch of Egyptian wisdom literature. And in one episode, I'll be talking about, I actually give quotes from this Egyptian wisdom literature and from Proverbs. And I ask the listener, well, which is which? So it seems that the Israelite, a lot of the wisdom literature was part of a very long Middle Eastern and Egyptian tradition.
Yeah, and then Job, is he considered more in the line of the wisdom as well? Or because I know he wouldn't be considered a prophet.
Or Christians could, playing again. Well, I think Christians consider him a prophet, but in the Jewish tradition, he is firmly in the what would you call it? In the wisdom, in the literature section of the Bible. I find Job very hard to read. It's a fairly long book, full of long discourses, and in the end, to me, it doesn't really come to any conclusion. Because there's poor Job, and he's been God has done all these terrible things to him. And he spends the entire book arguing with friends as to why this has happened. Mm-hmm. And the book seems to conclude with, well, I'm God. I can do what I like.
Yeah, that seems to be. But one thing I think that, and it's a reason I think that it may have been included in the canon for Jewish literature, is that it seems like in a lot of ways it's a direct protest to some of the stuff in Proverbs, because Proverbs tends to stay with the theme that good things happen to the righteous, bad things happen to those that are not righteous. So if you've done good, good things will happen, and if you do bad, bad things are going to happen. And the story of Job, where it's basically because God and Satan have a bet that all of this stuff happens to him, and it was nothing that Job did. And it's kind of like to say, well, sometimes just shit happens.
I would agree with that exactly, actually. Yeah, Proverbs is really quite complacent, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's sort of, well, you know your place in the world and everything will work out just fine and hard work. And Job's the exact opposite. It's not complacent at all. It's angry.
And at the end of it, I've heard one person. There was a book that was written not too long ago, or a few years ago, about trying to understand Job, and one of the things that it comes up with is this whole idea that instead of it being, well, I'm God, and so because I will it will be. It's that just Job never gets an answer, and it just, that's the whole point, is that there is no answer to why bad things happen. There is no answer to the problem of evil. It just is.
Yeah, that would seem to be the case. That would seem to be the case. There is no answer. I mean, I can see why things like Gnosticism arose, because it provides an answer to that question, doesn't it? It gives you a justification for the existence of evil.
Yeah, it really does. And when you have, I guess, when you have this idea of a supreme, really, God that is all good, that's when you start to have this problem of evil, because I don't think the Romans or the Greeks really had that same problem, or if they did, they didn't attribute it to the gods being why it was why bad things and good things happen. It was just that stuff happens.
Yeah, stuff happens, and quite often the gods were doing the bad things. Yes, we'll just bring up a storm to sink your ship. Thank you, Neptune. Thank you. Yeah, they did not have that theological problem at all. In fact, I'm a bit surprised that the notions in Gnosticism didn't arise earlier, because it seems like a fairly logical development to make, doesn't it? Rather than like Job, which is just sitting there going, we don't have an answer. Why didn't someone go, hey, I've got an idea? Problem solved.
Yeah, I think that started to happen, at least with the Gnostics, about the time that the Judaism got introduced to Hellenism, when Alexander the Great swept the globe, or the known world, because that introduced the Neoplatonism, and that gave some Jews, like I think Philo had a little bit of it in his work, but just a foundation to kind of say, well, if we throw in this Neoplatonic model of the world, which is what most people believe, then that would mean that the God that is the creator of the world that we think of is not the high God, and so now we have a scapegoat. And this is why bad stuff happens.
Yeah, this is why bad stuff happens.
Now, what do you make of the Song of Songs, to kind of change the topic a little bit? Because that is one weird book.
That is one weird book. Since I'm really interested mainly in the history, I tend to read these things and look at them fairly casually. And I'm just trying to remember the Song of Songs. How did that get there? It's a good question, actually, because, I mean, it seems to be a love poem or a love story.
Yeah, I think I've heard Robert Price actually talk about that it predates the Bible, that it was... it started off as a bawdy drinking song, but it was the story of who was it, Tammuz and Ishtar, that it was their love story, and then it became so popular, and you'd hear it sang even in Israelite taverns, and so the priest took it and kind of co-opted it, and then changed it around. So, this isn't pornography. This is actually one of the holiest books, because now it talks about God's relationship with Israel. So now we can stop singing this bawdy song in the bar and just move on.
Well, I'm sure the people who reinterpreted that way, they must have been really popular when they went out for a drink.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, and turning this happy, jolly song or poem or something into something sacred. I mean, can't you imagine all these drunk Israelites going, what do you mean? What?
What are you talking about, man?
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Oh,
yeah, have another one. Have another one.
Here, maybe you need something a little stronger than the ale. Try this.
Yeah.
Oh, now one question that I do have, because when I hear people talk about going into some of the apocryphal literature and some of the books like Daniel, we don't have all of Daniel in our current Bible, at least as far as in the canon, do we?
As far as I know, we do. The Catholics add two other sections called Susanna and Bell and the Dragon, which are nifty little novelettes, I suppose. As far as I know, we do. Okay. How would we know if there was something missing?
Well, that's what I was kind of referring to, because you don't find Susanna or Bell and the Dragon in the Protestant Bible. It's something
you don't.
That you only find if you pick up a Bible that has the Apocrypha in it. And I have read Bell and the Dragon, and that was kind of a interesting story. I would say, kind of a little mystery.
Well, I think those bits, they're in the Septuagint, the Greek version, but they're not in the Masoretic text. Now, why that happened, goodness knows. But as far as I know, all the apocryphal books in the Old Testament, we get them from the Septuagint, and the Catholics and Orthodox decided to keep them. The Jews threw them out, and Martin Luther, following the Jewish practice, also threw them out. Okay.
And I think as far as Catholics and Anglicans, which are I've heard them referred to as Catholic Light, they consider the Apocrypha as good stuff to read and has some good stuff in it, but it's not necessarily something that you want to base theology on.
No, exactly. I think, what's the phrase? You can read it for instruction, but not for doctrine.
Right.
Okay, fair enough.
And some of those books too I find, like Tobit, I think was a little bit more interesting than some of the books that they decided to leave in the canon, at least from my reading of them, because it seemed like it had a more entertaining story to it.
Yeah, I can't remember anything about Tobit. Not a damn word.
Well, I think he was the one that he had. It's one of the first mentions, I think, of angels besides Gabriel, and it may even give Gabriel the name in there. But it's another one of those morality tale kind of stories.
Oh, okay. So it's in the romantic fiction shelf of the Bible.
Yeah, which there's not a whole lot of, it seems, unfortunately.
No, there isn't. There's Esther and Judith, which seem to be twin books, and I can never remember which one is apocryphal. Esther is the one in all the canons. That's right. Judith isn't.
Now, when are they thinking that Daniel was actually put together? Because I know that it talks about King Nebuchadnezzar, and that seems to give it a date, but it doesn't seem like it really jives with what was actually happening during Nebuchadnezzar's time. So, when do they date him?
Yeah. The Book of Daniel actually gets all the history wrong. So it purports to have been written during Babylonian times. But from what I know, the universal scholarly consensus is that it was actually written very late, because none of the little details it gives about Nebuchadnezzar actually match any reality. It gets the name of the kings wrong, it transposes them. But the second half of Daniel, which is the apocalyptic bit, seems to be pretty clearly referring to Hellenistic times and Antiochus Epiphanes, the king against whom the Jews rebelled.
Okay.
And that's Maccabean times. So the prophecies that the book has, or the veiled prophecies in the apocalyptic section, you can match them pretty clearly to Hellenistic times and to the Maccabean revolt. But the history it purports to give after that time, the prophecies, they just don't work out. So the best guess is, until the point where the prophecies start to fail, that is, did not come to pass, that must be when the book was written. So that would put it at about 170 BC, which is, 500 years after Babylonian times.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So the consensus would be that the Daniel is a very late book.
Okay.
Now, maybe parts of it are a lot older. I mean, we can never really know